private session where we have two face-to-face classes, so I've met a few of you. But then do feel free to comment and to ask questions, because we're just finishing Thomas Friedman's The World Is. So, yes. But if you have to ask something, please, if you can stand and state your name, probably we could catch that on the video, or others could hear you more clearly. Go ahead, please.
I'm the 19-year-old blonde girl in class. Have you ever heard of the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon? In which, through 6 different connection points, everybody in the universe is connected to Kevin Bacon, and that's what happens with this. So it's not just political movements, it's social movements, and also it's everything. But you don't know that it's really Kevin Bacon. Just like I'm not really a 16-year-old blonde girl. So is there any kind of platform in which this kind of transparency is better?
That is an impossible question to answer because there are many ways to talk about what's better, and also you're identifying a moving target, because platforms are going to change. People who control them are going to change. Their priorities are going to change. Twitter from 2009 is not Twitter today. Facebook from 2009 is not.
I guess, for instance, on Skype, you actually look at me.
I'm sorry?
On Skype, you actually look at me, or is there actually advanced programs that make you could get an avatar on Skype that looks like a human being?
I don't quite follow your question.
Skype is a camera to camera,
Yes, it is.
but can you hack it so that you think you're looking at a camera image and it's just, and is there another platform that has better transparency?
Well, the transparency of the question, like I said, is a moving target. The Skype question, on the other hand, I don't think that there is a program which allows you to talk as though you were somebody else.
Yeah.
Yes. Other questions?
My name is Tristan. I'm a student here at USM. You gave some nice examples of sort of social imaginaries, whether they be sort of pro-democratic or even populist. But I was just wondering if you could comment on sort of the other side of that, sort of the way that media has been used in extremist groups or terrorist networks.
So I talked a little bit about it in terms of Operation Lollipop. You could also talk about it in terms of ISIS and the propaganda and how powerful it has been in terms of getting people signed onto the movement. So one of the things that comes up a lot in discussions of technology is that we always seem to be repeating this argument from Romanticism in the 17th century, where the question is always, is technology good or is technology evil? Right? We're going to hate technology. We're going to destroy all computers. We're going to be Luddites. We're going to go back to this pastoral world where everything's green, things are not polluted, and things are fantastic. Or technology is great because with a new app we can save people's lives, right? So it's always, is technology good? Is technology bad? Is technology meant for good, meant for evil? The answer is technology is cultural. It can be both. It's not black and white. Technology forms the fabric in which we interact with one another. It has, and it continues to, even more so in our everyday life. So it's not the most useful question to ask, is it good or is it bad? Has technology been always good? Has it always been always bad? But rather to understand the cultural import and impact of technology in creating our relationships with one another.
Dylan Ross, Poli-Sci major. I really liked that when you brought up slacktivism, because I'm probably the worst defender of it in this room. I'm really bad at it. I study in Brazil, and I follow a couple of media feeds out there, so I'll share stories in Portuguese that otherwise that otherwise wouldn't be shared in American media. I really like that you brought up Friedman. The world is flat, great read. Fiber optic cable. It's free-flowing ideas for the past almost 20 years now have really shaped the political landscape of the world, and it's cool. It's for good and bad purposes. Obviously, free-flowing extremism, globalization's really cool. Anyway, what would be the best advice you would give slacktivists such as myself?
Don't think of yourself, first of all, as a slacktivist.
My ambition far exceeds my GPA.
One of the most influential people I know started out with bad GPAs, right? Low GPAs, but doesn't mean that you can't be very successful at being a political activist, if that's where you want to go into. Well, first, one thing, if you haven't already read Howard Rheingold's NetSmart, that's a really cool book to read. Have you heard of it?
No.
The second chapter is called The Bullshit Detector, or something like that. Like, how do you tell when something is bullshit on the internet? Because, journalists get fooled. Remember Sandy, and you get, sharks blowing in the waters of the subway, and people being like, oh, this must be real. So, journalists get fooled by information going on Twitter. Journalists are being challenged as well. So Howard Rheingold's second chapter is basically how do you shift the wheat from the chaff. You don't know really, but he has some kind of tactics that you can use. He also talks a lot about the communities that form around different kinds of alliances on the internet. So I would say check out that book, because I think he will give you a very interesting blueprint about how slacktivism is not as slack as you could think, and how you may be able to create more change if that's your choice than you might otherwise think. Check out that book.
Thank you. I had a question because I'm here with people who are studying the visual arts, and of course, one of the things that happens, very quickly is that images come and people who were involved with that, busters were involved with Occupy too. And I didn't know if you had any particular thing. I mean, the slacktivism and that the quick image that is an anti-image to thousands and thousands of images that we get. I wonder if you speak to how effective the speaking back to, for example, commercial culture or commercials is. And is that a part of what you think about in research?
Yeah. Again, I'm not saying that simply having the space doesn't make you politically effective, right? Having the space simply means having the space. One of my favorite post-colonial theorists, B.Y. Mundumbe, he came out with a term called the colonial library. And I make reference to it a little bit in this talk. But basically, Mundumbe's idea is that when you talk about anything, you're not just pulling it out of nowhere. You're drawing on the colonial library. Histories, centuries of writing, of images, of ways of thinking about the subject that have been constructed by the colonial library. So for example, starving children in Africa. Africa as a country, not a continent. All these images make sense to us because they come from the colonial library, right? It's very, very hard to have one image that is going to really subvert the entire colonial library, because we're not just dealing with an image, we're dealing with histories of image, histories of impression, histories of creating meaning. So there have been so many times, because I teach a lot of courses on post-colonial studies, where I give an image, an anti-colonial image, and my American students completely don't understand that image. They cannot read that image because they don't have the apparatus to read that image. They only have the colonial library around them. And so even though it might be a very revolutionary image, they don't see the revolutionary part. And I'll give you a really good example. There was a Time magazine cover a little while ago. Let's see if I can find it. This you can tell is PC. All right, well, in the meantime,
Well, I can give you actually just an example that's been floating around a lot. That is, you'll never see this picture of Africa, and it's 6 major African cities. And the point is, you know, not very profound, except for that they're urban, they're electrified, they're not, you know, they're not mud huts, and so on. And I think when it circulates, it tends not to get liked. But, you know, it's not a profound one, it's just easy to describe.
I think it also depends on your networks and who wants to share stuff and who wants to like stuff. It's not, in my network anyway, stuff like that would get liked and shared. So I think it depends a bunch on your conception. So this was the image I was talking about. Is it familiar? Now I need to zoom in and I can't. So this image, when my students see this image, it makes so much sense to them. And it makes so much sense to you guys as well. Because this image looks like another image. What is the image that this image reminds you of? Madonna?
Christ's mother,
Okay. Good. Yes. What other image does this image harks back to another image in our political imagination? It looks familiar to us.
The National Geographic.
The National Geographic image. The woman with the eyes. This one. So when you look at this image, when you look at the other image, you realize that that image makes so much sense because it draws from you already having read and received the meaning of this message. That other message means more because you're using the same tropes to read this image. When you see this image, you're not thinking about this highly empowered modern woman. You're looking at a woman who you think looks haunted, probably needs help in some way. And so, when you look at this image, especially with the nose cut off, that makes even more sense to you. So an image like this, these images draw their meaning. They don't just draw their meaning from other images being produced simultaneously. They draw their meaning from important images that have structured the way in which that we think in the past. That is the colonial library. That's why the colonial library, or images that go against the colonial library, are so difficult to grasp and comprehend because they go against what we have learned, what we consider to be right, what we consider to be wrong.
Yes. Thanks so much. My name is James. I'm an old student here. I think one of the things that you draw to is this high resolution comparative, right? We can compare and contrast. I think Jefferson said about the French Revolution, when the soldiers that helped fight the American Revolution went back, they brought back this idea that they could actually see and compare. They didn't even know what despotism was because they couldn't see it until they actually saw something different. So does it give you a higher resolution comparator or a comparative, or does it give you a sometimes more distorted comparative? Another example, I spent time a couple of years in Europe before the Berlin Wall came down, and anybody who was walking the East German border could see that it was inevitable, that something was happening in the 80s because there was this comparative, and you can see it across the border, and they could see the contrast. So do we see that happening?
I think that short answer to your question is yes. Another good example of that happening historically has been why did colonialism end after the Second World War? And a lot of it was because in the 40s and 50s, a lot of people from the former colonies were going to study in the imperial centers in London and Paris, and finding out that actually conditions were similar throughout all these different colonies, comparing these conditions and be like, maybe it's not so cool anymore. Same idea of like African American soldiers going to Africa, seeing similarities in their conditions. Having the possibility of seeing these similarities is what really Marx was talking about when he's saying we need to understand your relationship to the means of production. That's a really complicated way of saying that you need to understand who's really oppressing you, right? Because the world's going to tell you different about who's actually oppressing you. And Marx says that media is trying to tell you something different about who's oppressing you. And what you really need is radical media that shows you that who is really at fault and how you can find your way out of it. And part of that is seeing that comparison that you talked about. Yes, so there definitely is that possibility. There's also the resistance, and that resistance comes from the fact that these images and these comparative images are sometimes really hard to understand and read. And they're hard to understand and read because of the established images, the established forms of knowledge that we already have. And what is right and what is wrong.
Historians would say, speaking as a historian is the case, that part of the point is who controls the technology, and that was true in the American Revolution with the question of who could get out the best pamphlets and who had the money to do that.
Yep.
But it's also still true, and in particular there's the issue of gender. I thought I'd raise that too, in terms of who is it who really has access and control and experience and knowledge, and it does look like it's still a little one-sided. And then lastly, the other thing is the role of English language, which seems to sort of undermine and undercut efforts to be more democratic.
All these points that you talked about, actually, I worked on in my other research, in other parts of my research. But I wanted to address your point before you talked about language. What was that?
Power and gender?
Power and gender, yes. So that's actually been a big issue that has been coming up in the field of digital humanities, where the big controversy, like, 7 years ago now, is when one prominent senior DA person said to be a digital humanist, you need to know how to code. And then other people said, well, assuming that you have the knowledge to code comes with a lot of gender privilege, class privilege, and possibly racial privilege as well that you're not thinking about. So that has been and continues to be a huge issue in the digital humanities, and I stand on your side, which is the good side. And the other point that you're raising about the English language, this is something that a lot of post-colonial theorists or people who are critical of digital spaces do work on a lot as well. I was part of a post-colonial studies critical code working group last year that had a discussion about this, like what would it be like to have a programming language that wasn't based in English. Because the big issue is not simply that we're all using English to communicate, but we're programming in English or the Roman alphabet. So there was somebody who came up with a code in Arabic, and we were kind of a programming code in Arabic, and we were kind of taking apart the code and seeing how different it was actually, and whether it had any liberation potential towards it. But yeah, those are really good points. And yes, people are studying them. Not enough people in my thinking, but those are really good points.
Good.
Hi, my name is Jasmine. I was was just wondering, sorry, I came in late, so I hope I'm not like asking something you've already discussed, but with the upcoming election in 2016, I was just wondering, like, do you think social media will have more of an influence, or will like bring up more voters? Do you think it will affect that in any way? I was just wondering your thoughts.
I don't know whether social media will make a difference in terms of bringing out more voters, but I think that the impact of social media has already been noticed in previous elections. Like Obama was known as the guy who's like really good at social media, right? A lot of the wars are also being fought on social media. So I would say that social media has been and is going to continue to be a really important space for people to share political ideas. I don't necessarily know that because we're sharing more political ideas, we're going to become more politically motivated to go and vote, but it definitely has an impact.
My name's Ben, and I'm in the Stimmer Falls class. This is a little off topic, but I was reading Friedman's book, and he talked about informing and how it's made education more accessible. And I just wanted to ask, how has the internet and social media created opportunity for class mobility?
So you mean class as in social class, not education?
Yeah, like your income and moving up from poverty to middle class or becoming successful and rich. How has it created opportunities? And it's evident that it's more accessible.
Mm-hmm.
The internet's become more accessible to individuals, and it's created opportunity for informing among all classes.
I think the Occupy movement is a good example of ways in which people have risen up against powerful corporate banks, for example. In terms of, I would be really hesitant to say that social media is the great democratic leveler of everything and everybody, because not poorer people often don't have as much access to the internet as much as wealthier people. I would say that social media simply affords that potential, affords that space, but it's not necessarily that it's because we have social media we're going to like have class struggle and let it be resolved, and we're all going to live in a post-Marxist society. That's not going to happen.
Just in your own work, and you're talking about intervention and this social media being a space of intervention, how much do you see your own scholarship changing in terms of time and space? So you publish books, you publish articles, you have a blog, you're active on Twitter, you are doing sort of real-time things and websites. So have you seen the platforms that you are putting your ideas out there shift over time? And how is that informing your teaching and the products that you're asking your students to put out in terms of whether they're writing papers for you or creating blogs and things like that?
That's a really good question. First of all, my most prestigious articles are paywall because the journals are paywall, meaning that they're not read. Unlike my less prestigious articles, which are open access and like the people behind those outlets really know how to work social media, meaning that my stuff and my stuff gets read. People know me for that stuff rather than the more prestigious peer-reviewed paywall stuff. So I would say that I'm in a unique position because I come from an institution which values non-traditional publication outlets and non-traditional research. So I can afford to not pursue the regular route to being obscurely forgotten in a university library where nobody comes and looks at your book. And because this is I am rewarded for that at my institution. I don't know how many other people can say the same thing. My school allows me the opportunity to spend more time on these things than maybe I would if I was in a different institution.
Well, my sister's a post-colonial scholar. She teaches in Turkey. She's a theorist. But when I told her you were coming, she goes, "Oh, she's Twitter famous." So, not in a bad way, right? In the post-colonial community, which is very active on Twitter, so is she. it's a thing, it's a way to be known in your field in
Oh,
a very
yeah.
different, interesting way, I think.
Yeah, and it actually surprises me that that a lot of post-colonial scholars are on Twitter, as you say, because a lot of them I know are not on Twitter. But your sister's like in the vanguard, man, and she's very on Twitter.
If you met her, you would say that.
I totally agree. But yeah, so Twitter, as you say, is also kind of where I built my reputation. I started saying I was that random person spouting nonsense, and other people were like, hey, what she has to say isn't that dumb, so we're going to pay attention to her. Twitter is how I built that presence. I would not have had a lot of the opportunities that I have today without being good at Twitter, as some people call me. So, other questions about how does this change my teaching? It's changed my teaching a lot, actually. One of the things that I talk a lot about in my research is the importance and the political potential of editing Wikipedia, which also suffers, as you pointed out, from an overwhelming gender gap, where a majority of Wikipedia editors are men, usually around the age of 25, college educated, English speaking. Much fewer Wikipedia editors are women, meaning that there are certain topics that have a lot of representation on Wikipedia, and some topics that have less representation. So one thing that I've done, for example, in some of my classes, like my Seminar in Feminist Theory course, which is the capstone course on Women and Gender Studies at Stockton, I used to have my students write a final research paper. Now they have to contribute a certain amount of content to Wikipedia on feminist theory. And when I first tell them this, first the look is absolute fear on their face when I first introduce this, because, oh my God, other people are going to read this, that's not you. I don't mind embarrassing myself to you, apparently, but I really mind embarrassing myself to the world on Wikipedia. So it is fear on their face, and then there's usually a lot of engagement and excitement, because not my knowledge can change the world. My research can help change the world just a little bit. So that actually has been some of the most successful assignments that I've done, like trying to get students to turn their knowledge not simply into things that they bring to the classroom, but into a wider public. And to understand also that Wikipedia isn't the devil, as what many educators up to that point have told them, because a lot of my students will say, I thought you were never supposed to use Wikipedia. Well, I'm saying you gotta change Wikipedia. And that's actually a really useful thing for students to learn, that how peer review at Wikipedia works, how systems of research are vetted, even if it's on Wikipedia, how discussions of communities agree on things and disagree on things, and how are those disputes resolved or sometimes not resolved very badly. It's all good learning experience. And if any of you are interested in incorporating Wikipedia in your classrooms, I have some really good contacts at the Wikipedia Education Foundation who are dying to give you support to incorporate more editing Wikipedia in your classroom.
Hi, I'm Matt. I'm a sophomore at USM this year. You presented a really intriguing drawback of social media, in that a lot of social media platforms are controlled by data mining corporations. I was just wondering if you would comment on some of the ways that social media activists can circumvent that drawback, and or some of the social media platforms that may not be as data mined for corporations that might be in the interest or in the business of trying to track social revolutions.
That's a really good question, because the problem with platforms that aren't owned by big corporations is that they're kind of really badly designed. And nobody wants to use them. So there have been alternatives to Facebook. There was one, Elo, is that what it was called, a couple of years ago? Elo. Yeah, see, it wasn't bad. And then there was another one that was trying to be an alternative to Twitter, that was open source, that was not owned by a corporation. I don't remember what it's called now. It had a very ambitious name. Also went, right? Because in order to make a good product, you need to have money. You need to have money. And also, if you have a bad product, nobody's going to sign up for it. Look at Google Plus, for example. Google Plus. So if the problem is like, oh, I hate Facebook, I'm going to go on Google Plus, is that nobody's going to read your updates. Because very few people are on Google Plus. So it's a hard question to answer because a lot of these platforms that you're talking about, these very ambitious ideas, they die. They cannot compete with money. And secondly, it's a hard question to answer because they die or because they're not user-friendly and nobody gets on them, they don't have the kind of reach that other social media platforms do. What I would say is that it's simply to be, what we need to be is to be cognizant of the tools that we use. It's like, for example, one of the most important classical works that post-colonial theorist Chinua Achebe and writer Chinua Achebe criticized was Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness as a colonialist novel. Well, those of you who don't know Heart of Darkness will probably know Apocalypse Now. Apocalypse Now is also like an American version of Heart of Darkness. But Chinua Achebe says that he never stopped teaching Conrad, never stopped teaching Heart of Darkness. And I don't start teaching Heart of Darkness as well. What you have to do is to learn how to be critical of the tool, of the text that you're reading, not necessarily to stop what you're doing. Learn how to protect yourself from the tool, learn how to use the tool, the drawbacks of the tool, the limitations of the tool, as well as the possibilities and affordances of the tool.
Thank you. Thank you for a wonderful I do want to point out that it's been a long time since we've had a provost come for a meeting like this. So it's absolutely delightful. It's a delightful thing to have Provost Janine Uzi. Thank you. And we could probably tweet her email address so that you can tell her what kind of new programs and what kind of new learning opportunities you may really want to have.
I do have a Twitter account. I only tweet in Latin.
We could do that, though. Thank you. Thank you very much for coming, especially to my members of my class, and I think Libby's class also, and Jan's class.
All of the place.
Great. Good. Thank you.